I want to talk to you about properly aligning your fabric for cutting on your Go or Studio die cutter. For this video, I'm going to be demonstrating techniques using the Go model, but these apply to Go Baby and also to the Studio as well. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is a little bit about the dies. The die that I'm going to be demonstrating today is the quarter square triangle die for the Go. And this particular die is actually angled in the die board. There are several dies for both the AccuQuilt Studio and the Go that come angled in the die board. And basically what that means is that the die board is square, but the blades within the die are angled slightly. So if you can see this, this die, it's kind of angled off to my right here. And if I snapped a straight line, you can see if I snap a straight line against the blades, you can see that line kind of trailing off the side there. So this is an example of a die blades that are angled in the board. And one of the most common questions that people ask about when they're using these is, well, do I line up my fabric with the edge of the board or do I follow the blade? And the answer to that is follow the blade. The reason that these dies are slightly angled in the board is so that as you're cutting, when the die is running through the cutter, you're not cutting the blade straight on. I've heard of people cracking mats if the die is straight on. So for those dies that aren't angled in the die board, sometimes you need to angle the die as it goes through the cutter, but for the ones that are angled in the die board already, you're okay. Now, I always snap straight lines. Usually I'll do both vertical and horizontal lines on my dies, but this one I only have the straight, the horizontal line marked. Now let's talk a little bit about fabric. I did put a video up that talked about how you can straighten your fabric with some additional information on the fabric grain, but I wanted to just talk to you about how the how the grain in the fabric interacts with the die when you're cutting. Now, just to review, fabric that is parallel to the selvage is what's called the straight grain. And this is the lengthwise grain that has no stretch. So I'm tugging on these edges and you cannot see the fabric moving. So that is the lengthwise grain and that follows the selvage edge. The crosswise grain has a little bit more stretch, so you can see as I tug on these edges, you can see the fabric flexing. And then the bias is along the 45 degree angle between the crosswise and the lengthwise grain, and if I pull this, you can see it stretches the most. So if you have a piece of fabric that does not have selvages on it anymore, you can fairly easily find the straight grain or the crosswise grain by just tugging on it. So if you don't have a selvage here and you tug on it, it does not stretch, whereas the crosswise grain, it will. So if you think about it, as we're running things through our cutter, we're putting the dies under pressure, we're putting the mats under pressure, and the fabric is actually being stretched a little bit as it goes through because of the pressure that's being applied. So particularly for triangles and for squares, we want to be really mindful about how we place our fabric on the cutter so that we don't end up with shortcuts. Now, if I don't want my fabric to stretch as it goes through the cutter, then it makes sense that I want the non-stretchy part to run through the lengthwise part. So if you think about it, I really want my lengthwise grain rolling through the cutter because it's not going to stretch as it goes through. So for a die like this that has many shapes on it where I do care about getting the exact shape and having things end up being the exact size that I need them, which is the whole point of using the AccuQuilt cutter, I also want to keep in mind the grain. So if I run this through with several layers and I use the, sorry, I'll fold this just so you can kind of see. So I'm folding this on the lengthwise grain here, so this is the non-stretchy part. So if I align this on my die going this way with the lengthwise grain going this way, I won't get any stretch and my pieces will be exactly the same. Where if I run my pieces through and I fold this along the crosswise grain and I went this way, then as it rolls through, I'm prone to get a little bit of stretch. Now this doesn't happen all the time or with every fabric and every cut, but if it can happen enough to frustrate a lot of people. So what I would recommend is that if you're going to run things through that way, then you want to turn your fabric around so that your lengthwise grain is running through the cutter, and that can help you get more accurate pieces. Also, and this is where having these straight lines comes in handy, because if I fold my fabric this way so that my straight grain or my lengthwise grain is running through, then I can use that straight line. Then I can use the straight line and align the fabric on it. So again, when I'm using a die where the blade is angled in the board, I want to follow the angle of the die, and I also want to keep in mind, take into consideration the grain line, particularly for squares and for triangles. For the applique shapes, it's not as critical, typically because you have a fusible or a stabilizer underneath that's going to keep it from stretching. Now when you're handling strip dies, and I do have a strip die here, this strip die is 22 inches long, so it is designed to take a regular piece of fabric that's off the bolt and that you can run through when it's folded halfway across the bolt. So if you pretend that this is a 45-inch wide piece of fabric that I've folded in half, so this is how this fabric would have come off of the bolt. When I run this through the cutter, it's perfectly fine to run it through on the crosswise grain. This die was designed to go that direction, just for making efficient cuts. And because these are straight strips, I'm not as concerned about the stretching, because the stretching that it's doing is in one direction, and so I'm going to end up with strips the right width. But what you do need to keep in mind is, because of the stretch, you want to minimize the stretching as much as possible, and to do that, or minimize the impact of the stretching, and to do that we want to run these through our cutter with the fold first. So as I'm lining this up, I don't want the cut edge or the selvage edge to go through the cutter first. I want the fold to go through the cutter first. So that's going to cut that fold, and then the rest of the fabric will stretch just a little bit as it goes through the cutter, but you shouldn't have any problems with it at that point. So again, just a couple of tips for triangles and squares. Try to run the fabric through your cutter using the lengthwise grain that's following perpendicular to the roller bar, so that your straight grain doesn't stretch. And if it helps you to take a piece of fabric and find the lengthwise grain and pretend like you're rolling it through the die, and so the lengthwise grain is what I want going in first. So I want to fold my fabric so that the lengthwise grain is what is entering the fabric cutter. And then for strips, you want to align it so that the fold goes first and your selvage edge would be last. It's perfectly fine to run lengthwise strips through. I do that all the time, particularly for borders. But those are just a couple of tips to help you align your fabric on your AccuQuilt fabric die cutter. Happy quilting!